Hey there, it's Silver. This is Lords of the Fallen. So yeah, a second chance at the Lords of the Fallen sort of thing. As far as I'm aware, this game doesn't really have anything to do with the original. It's just sort of using its name and the same genre. But the first Lords of the Fallen was kind of notable. It wasn't a great game, but it was pretty much the first major attempt at what we now call the Souls-like genre. But of course, that word hadn't even been created yet. Back when the first game came out in 2014, Dark Souls 3 was still brand new, so there was some pretty rough comparison to be had there, and we've of course had a lot of different games and a lot of different iterations and innovations and things in the genre at this point, so how does it fare up now? This is of course a Souls-like, and it does use a lot of the more familiar mechanics that you would expect from the genre, but it also does have some pretty neat ideas. The first thing to talk about real quick are the visuals, because it's actually a beautiful game. It is pretty graphically intensive, like it does require a good PC to have it on like maxed out settings, although to be honest, even on lower settings it still looks pretty good. It plays very well on the Steam Deck with everything set to low, and it still looks pretty nice on that small screen, but on my main PC and the footage you're seeing in the background here, everything is maxed out. Although, of course, I doubt you'll be seeing it quite as I did, considering, YouTube's compression algorithm, once it gets a hold of footage this visually detailed, it's going to chew it into pieces, but we'll see what happens. So yeah, this game is very good looking. It's of course very dark and grungy and dirty and nasty looking at the same time, but it also looks really good. You'll see that things like weapon models and armor models look very detailed and nice. Environments are beautiful and grotesque, and especially when it goes to the Umbral world, you'll see all sorts of like creepy giant statues, or maybe they're statues, and some other things around the place. You'll come to a place like, say, a big ravine that is very pretty. It's this huge sort of rocky gorge, and then when you go to the other world, the gorge is just full of all these like clawing statue-like corpse things. It's a really well-presented game in terms of its visuals. You will be frequently surprised by some of the places that you go and how they actually look. It is definitely quite a looker. Also, in terms of the audio presentation, it's quite good in that regard as well. The just general battle sounds and stuff are just fine. Hits sound pretty impactful and fleshy and gross, but more importantly, the music is quite good. Your exploration music is somber oftentimes and a little bit foreboding in a lot of areas, and your boss battle music is, of course, very nice, and there have been some pretty memorable tracks so far in terms of high-quality boss music, which when it comes to the genre, that's just one of the things that you want, right? That's what people expect. They want awesome boss tracks, and I think the game does a pretty good job of providing a lot of those. So, the main gimmick this time around is that this game uses sort of dual-world gameplay, and I know this is not a new concept. There have been plenty of games that have done the whole going between multiple worlds thing, but I have to admit I'm a complete sucker for it. I don't know if it's because I played a lot of A Link to the Past as a kid, so like early on in my gaming life I was exposed to this concept and really enjoyed it, but regardless of the reason, I tend to really like it when games do this, and this game does it very, very well. So you have the world of the living, which is called Axiom, which is where you spend most of your time, and you have the world of the dead, which is called Umbral, which is where you'll also spend a fair amount of time, although you are encouraged not to spend too much time there, but we'll get on to that. And your character is called a lamp bearer. You can tell by the way that you bear a lamp. And this lamp allows you to actually peer into the other world. So at any time you can switch to it, hold the trigger down, and you will just hold up the lamp, and you will be able to see into the Umbral world. So you can just check and see what it currently looks like in that place on the other side. But the thing about this is, when you're peering into the other world, there are also enemies in that world, and when you're holding up your lamp, the enemies can see you too, and they can actually attack you through the veil, and if they get a really good hit on you, they can actually forcibly pull you into the Umbral world. You can actually interact with things in a limited way just by using the lantern. So you may come across a big gap in the air between two spots, but if you look in the Umbral world, you'll see there's actually a bridge made of like a big spine going in between the two places. And as long as you hold up the lamp, you can walk across this bridge without actually going to the other world entirely, because holding up the lamp does actually manifest part of that world in your immediate vicinity. So as long as you stay looking down at the bridge, you can actually walk across it. Just don't look elsewhere or drop your lamp, because you'll immediately fall to your death. But at any time you can also choose to fully transition into the Umbral world, just by holding up your lamp and holding the square button or the X button. And this will just force you over to the other world. It'll also wither half of your health gauge, which I'll explain in a minute. But this allows you to fully explore the Umbral world. The thing is, it's actually not as easy to get back, because you can't just transition yourself back whenever you want. Instead, you have to find specific places. So the bonfires of this game, the checkpoints, are called Vestages, and they are actually the corpses of previous lamp bearers, which is just lovely for you. And these you can rest at any time to, of course, restore all of your resources and respawn all the enemies and things, but resting at them also transitions you back into Axiom if you happen to be in the Umbral world, so this is one way to cross back. The other way is occasionally you'll find these things called effigies, and these effigies allow you to transition back at that spot, but they break when you use them and only get restored when you rest, so you can only use each one once per rest. The really interesting thing here is it also acts as a second life. If you die in Axiom, you actually stand right back up where you died, but you're forcibly transitioned into Umbral, so you can actually get back up even mid-boss fight when you die. And if you're able to cross back to Axiom, then you get that life back, so you can actually keep dying and coming back as long as you're able to keep finding ways to cross back. However, death in Umbral will send you back to a checkpoint entirely, and you'll drop all of your vigor, which is your souls in this game. So whether you got to Umbral on purpose by crossing while you were still alive, or got there from dying once, it doesn't matter. Dying in Umbral in any form will kill you and send you back to a checkpoint. You can also use your lamp to do this thing called a soul flay, and it has a limited number of charges represented by blue flames beneath your gauges up there in the top left. You only start with one charge, but eventually you'll be able to upgrade your lamp and get further charges. You can use the soul flay in a couple of different ways. One of them is to interact with things in the environment, which you can do infinitely. Doing this doesn't take charges at all. You can do things like pulling bridges out, extending platforms, moving stuff around, getting these like sort of statues that are basically like treasure chests. They drop loot when you flay them and things like that. But you can also use Soul Flay on an enemy, whether you're in Axiom or Umbral, and this actually rips out their soul temporarily. And while their soul is ripped out, you can attack it, and it will wither part of their health gauge, and then eventually they will rejoin with each other, and the way withered health works is it just means part of your health turns gray. And if you take any damage at all of the withered health disappears, and you still take the damage of the attack on top of that. So withered health is very dangerous because it will chop off that entire section of the health gauge if you get hit at all. However, if you do damage to an enemy, then your red health will climb up this gray section and actually restore it back to normal health. So it's like a modified version of the Bloodborne rally system where it only happens sometimes. Like the only way to get withered health is to either take withered damage or to block an attack, which will wither part of your health gauge. And then you can attack back and get that health restored back to its normal red state. But unlike the Bloodborne rally system or the same system in Lies of P or something like that, it doesn't decrease over time. So if you have like half of your health gauge withered, it'll stay that way. It won't slowly drain. Combat-wise, you've got a really good amount of stuff. You've got, of course, all the classic examples of what you would want, from daggers to long swords to hammers to grand swords, which are sort of like ultra great swords from Dark Souls, spears and all kinds of stuff like that. You've got plenty of weapons to use. One system this game uses that I really like is that it makes it clear in the tutorial that you can switch from one-handing a weapon to two-handing a weapon mid-combo. So you can do things like just two light attacks while one-handing a weapon, then press Y or triangle to two-handed, press the light attack button again, and then you do the third attack but while two-handing instead, and then you can press it again and return back to one-handed. So you can mix and match your combos between light and heavy attacks, which can be charged, by the way, and one and two-handing in mid-combo, which I think is a really cool idea. I've always liked the whole, switching between one and two-handed mechanic that the Souls games introduced. I think it's a really cool idea, but I really like this game's interpretation of it, where you can do it so fast that you can actually do it mid-combo and create your own sort of custom combos that way. I think it's a good idea. You've also got ranged weapons, and these they're not equipped in the same slots as your melee weapons. Instead, you have a ranged weapon slot where you just hold the left trigger and it equips whatever is in that slot, or your lantern, depending on which one you switch to. And so stuff like bows, crossbows, and spellcasting catalysts go in this slot. So if you're using a ranged weapon like a bow, you can equip different kinds of arrows to different buttons. So you can, say, hold the left trigger and press R1 versus hold the left trigger and press R2, and they can be two different ammo types. And the same thing goes for spells. You don't have a number of spell slots based on a stat like attunement. Instead, the number of spell slots is based on the catalyst that you're using to cast spells. And you can equip that catalyst's different buttons, each with different spells, so while you're holding it, you just press that button and cast that spell individually. I really like this system. I think it's a really elegant way to change up how like spell casting works in a game like this, and it works really well in combat. You've got 3 different kinds of magic. You have infernal magic, which tends to be fiery, as you would expect. Radiant magic, which is light, but it's very aggressive light. It's light that often takes the form of like thorns and bloody stuff and things like that. It's a pretty cool effect. And you have abyssal magic, which requires both the radiant and inferno stats to use, sort of like hexes from DS2. And it has their own catalysts that you can actually use for it. You've also, of course, got your armor slots. The armor system in this game is very familiar. Each armor will come in different sets, themed to various different types of NPCs or different appearances, and you can wear whatever you like. And of course, they do have varying stats, but of course, as we all know in games like this, a lot of it is based around how you want to look rather than how the stats work. And there's plenty of really good fashion armor in this game. There's some really cool looking stuff. A lot of it's super well modeled and interesting. One little extra bit that I like is that the encumbrance number that shows you like how close you are to fat rolling, basically, it's actually a gauge that is marked at each threshold, so you know exactly how close you are to each threshold of rolling slower and slower. I like that. I think it's cool to have a visual representation of that rather than simply a percentage. You've also got an amulet slot and 2 ring slots that work like you would expect, all sorts of different ring effects. Some of them are pretty cool, like there's one that makes it to where you can actually cast spells of the wrong type. Like you can use a catalyst for Inferno spells but cast Radiant spells with it instead with the Inferno scaling. So there's some really cool stuff in terms of the various builds and stuff that are going to be enabled by the amulet and ring slots. There's also a really cool feature in the armor tincts. You'll find tincts around the place as loot in various places, as well as there are several different PvP locations, and they each have their own currency that you get for PvPing there, and some of the things you can buy with that currency are armor tincts of various kinds, and these are basically like skins. They're color sets, and you can apply them to all of your armor. So you can apply any of the tincts you have to any armor piece individually, or apply it to all of them at once, or whatever, to customize how you look, which is awesome. And they're not used up either, by the way. Once you have a tinct, you have it forever. So this allows a lot of further cosmetic customization of your armor sets and things, which I think is super cool. I'm always a fan of that kind of thing, especially when it's as a reward rather than something that you have to pay real money for. The pacing of combat in this game, I would say, is closest to something like Dark Souls 3, if I was to compare it to any other game in the genre. It's not as fast as something like Bloodborne or Lies of P, but it's not as slow as DS1 or DS2. It's a little faster, but not super fast, and you still are committing quite a bit to a swing whenever you press the attack button, because swings do take a little while to go off, even for faster weapons, so it's not mega fast. You do have a dodge dash when you're locked onto something, and it does have a pretty forgiving amount of immunity frames, so you can dodge through attacks with it pretty effectively. You can also double tap the dodge button to do a dodge roll, which is important in this game because the dodge roll covers a lot of ground, so it allows you to get away from like a big AoE or something. It does use an Estus-like healing system. You have this cross thingy that heals you, and it does have a limited number of charges, and every time you go to a vestige, it recharges itself. And occasionally you'll come across these things called saintly quintessences that you can bring back to an NPC who is actually the first major boss of the game, by the way, who decides to befriend you after you beat the crap out of her, and you can have her use those to upgrade your cross, and it will get more charges, and it will heal more at the same time. One really neat mechanic that I really enjoy, this is something that was actually planned for Dark Souls 3 but ended up not happening. You can actually create your own vestiges, your own checkpoints in this game. So occasionally you'll come across these places called umbral flower beds. They're like sort of white vines and flowers. And if you happen to have one of these consumables called a vestige seed in your inventory, you can use your lantern to plant it and actually create a vestige right there. And this vestige will have all of the full capabilities of a normal vestige that's already placed in the world. So you can fast travel from it, you can fast travel to it, you can level up at it, you can rest at it, you can do all the things you can as any other normal vestige, but you can only have one of them. It'll last forever. So once you've made it, it'll stay there, but if you make another one, then it'll be replaced. You will quickly come to the conclusion that these are extremely important, because a lot of areas in this game are very large and sprawling, and they don't have very many vestiges already placed in them. Usually you'll have 1 or 2 vestiges that are placed in central locations in an area, but for the most part, if you're striking out in any direction to find loot and bosses and stuff, you're not gonna have another one to go to. Just as a quick example, in the Forsaken Fen level, there is a vestige sort of right in the middle. And the boss of that area, the Hushed Saint, who is a very difficult boss, by the way, so it's probably going to take you several tries, is way far off to one side. And if you want to do the boss run back from that vestige, you have to go through almost the entire level again with like 30 plus enemies in the way just to get back to the boss. However, the boss also happens to have an umbral flower bed right next to the entrance to his arena. So if you have a seed, you can plant your own vestige right there, and suddenly the boss run back is like 5 steps, and you don't have to worry about any enemies in the way or anything. So it becomes very clear early on that the levels are designed in such a way to reward you for having clever vestige placement, because there will only be a few of them already there, and the rest you're expected to make yourself as you strike out in any direction in order to sort of have your own front lines checkpoint. Area design in general in this game is very good. In my opinion, you have to remember that basically every zone in this game is actually 2, because you have the normal Axiom area and then you have the same area in Umbral, and sometimes they are entirely different. Some of them have platforms and bridges and interactable elements and stuff that aren't there at all in the other world. Like in the previously mentioned Forsaken Fens area, roughly half the level is only accessible in Umbral because it's underwater. If you try to go underwater normally, you'll just die. But if you are in Umbral, then it's actually like a dry lake bed and you can explore it without dying. Well, hopefully. The game does have a very rewarding sense of exploration, which is sort of something you have to have in this genre, in my opinion. There's a lot of loot off the beaten path to find. There's a lot of like optional NPCs that are very helpful to find. Of course, various NPC quest lines that can be quite cryptic, that require a good amount of exploration to sort of feel them out. You've also got tons of optional areas, including entire optional boss fights. The game just has a whole lot of stuff that it can reward you with for going on various paths. You'll find that each area generally is quite large and has several different ways through it, including dipping in and out of the Umbral world for various shortcuts and one-way grates and ladders and stuff like that. And you'll also find that there are often a lot of like branching paths that go back to different areas. So this game does have that sense of, oh, these connect. Like, oh, I dropped that ladder, or oh, I opened that door and I'm back here again, which is a feeling that I always seek out in the Souls-like genre because Dark Souls did it so well. And this game does a pretty good job of having a lot of doubling back, shortcuts, unlocked doors, and things like that that join areas back together again. I did mention you don't want to stay in Umbral for too long, so I should probably explain that. For one, while you're there, a lot of the enemies are pretty strong. There are some Umbral-only enemies that are quite powerful, but also there are these basic sort of hollow husk enemies that spawn indefinitely while you're there, so it'll keep spawning waves of them. And this can, of course, wear you down if you're not careful the longer you're there. But also, while you're there, you'll notice this eyeball gauge on the right side of the screen. This is called dread, and as you spend more time in Umbral, the dread builds up, and as it builds up, more of those enemies will spawn more frequently, so you'll be more easily overwhelmed by them if you're not careful. And if the dread gauge completely fills up, this horrifying Reaper thing called, I think it's called the Crimson Shadow or something like that, spawns, and it is very bad news, and you need to leave immediately as soon as it happens, or preferably before it happens. It can teleport and go through the ground, it can sort of disappear for a minute, it has hugely damaging attacks. Just being near it withers your health gauge away, and if it hits you, it disables your healing. So it's very bad, and you definitely don't want to fight it. In fact, I don't even think you can kill it, I'm pretty sure. Oh, there's also one other thing I wanted to mention that this game does differently. So, if you're not familiar with like the Souls-like genre, one of the things that you'll often see are boss souls, things that bosses drop when you kill them that are like a core of that boss's being in some way, and you can then bring that boss soul to an NPC, sometimes multiple NPCs, and they can turn it into something. So chances are, if a boss had a super cool sword during their fight, you can get that sword if you turn in their soul to a blacksmith or something like that. This is a common thing in Souls-like games, and is one of my favorite parts because it's cool to see what neat stuff you can make from bosses. This game actually uses a version of it, but in a way that I've never seen before, and I really, really like. So as you're exploring Umbral, you'll occasionally come across these memories of things that have happened in the past, and you can soulflay them to view the memory. They're called stigmas. And when you view a stigma, you'll get some of this material called Umbral Scouring, and you'll also sometimes get some other items as a reward for viewing it. When you kill a boss, there will be a stigma related to that boss's past in the arena that you can view after they're dead, and if you do that, you get some more scourings, and you get their remembrance. You can bring this remembrance back to an NPC who's only visible in the Umbral world in the safe hub area, the bridge, and you can select any remembrance you want, and it will show you a list of various things that you can make from it, but they're not consumed. you can actually make all of the things from one remembrance without getting rid of it. They cost those umbral scourings, so you might have their full set of armor, their weapon, and one spell related to them, for instance. So you've got like 6 different things you can make from their remembrance, and each one will have a different scouring cost, and as long as you have those material items, you can pay them and get whatever you want from each remembrance. So you actually keep each remembrance as a key item, and each one is sort of its own menu of possible things you can make from it, and you just pay these scourings to make whatever you want. I think this is a super cool iteration of the boss soul system, and I would like to see this used more in other games, because it's a really fun way to do it. It gives you a lot more choice as to what you can make from each one, because you're not limited to only choosing one thing per new game cycle. Instead, you can have all of them, so you can possibly make, 5 or 6 different things, and it's a cool idea. I really like it. What about difficulty? That's also, of course, important. Well, I personally find this game to be quite hard. Harder than Lies of P for me. Some of the areas are pretty brutal, and exploration can be quite difficult, especially before you have a good number of vestige seeds to make your own checkpoints. And some of the bosses are very challenging. Someone like the Hushed Saint, for instance, took me like 8 tries to down, and is just a kind of complex fight, because you've got to dismount them, and you've got all these things you can use your lamp on in the arena. The bosses have a lot of health, and you can summon an NPC if you want. There will usually be several available NPCs for any given major story boss, and you can only summon one. You can choose one of any of them. And they are pretty helpful, although I don't think they heal themselves most of the time unless they have a healing spell, but they also won't be available generally for any of the optional bosses. But hey, they are there if you're having a difficult time and you would like to maybe ease the difficulty a little bit, although in my opinion they are actually not as useful as like an NPC summon in Dark Souls or something like that, because they don't heal, they don't last as long, but still, if a little bit of dynamic difficulty to make the fight a little bit easier if you need it, and you might, because this game is definitely quite challenging. Overall, my view of Lords of the Fallen is a very positive one. It does have its problems, and it does have its design decisions that I haven't always been a fan of, like giving bosses a ton of health. I feel like maybe they could use a little bit less health or do less damage to you, but still, I think it's a really solid entry into the Souls-like genre, and I think it makes its name for itself a lot better than the original Lords of the Fallen did, at just being a really good example. It's a lot of fun, its themes are awesome, its dual-world gameplay is well realized and super fun to do, and it's got a lot of variety and content, a lot of places to go, a lot of bosses to fight, a lot of enemy variety to face, and a lot of equipment variety to make your own builds out of. There's a lot to do here, and it's definitely worth playing through multiple times, because you probably will need to, because some of the NPC questlines can be very cryptic and hard to figure out on your own. And although it is definitely on the more difficult side of the genre, it is very much worth playing for any fans of it, I feel, because it does a lot right. And also, I have to admit, the update schedule has been very impressive. They've released at least one patch for the game, like every single day since its release, sometimes multiple patches per day, fixing bugs and improving performance and doing all sorts of things, even some balance changes and stuff, changing prices of items in shops. They've really been like hard at work every single day to update the game in some noticeable way, and I really appreciate that kind of dedication. Once the game is released, it's nice to have them taking a lot of feedback into consideration very directly and very quickly, and implementing patches and stuff like super quickly. It's really cool to see. So that's my current view on Lords of the Fallen. I'd say it's definitely worth a purchase if you're a fan of the genre at all, or if you just like difficult action RPGs and you don't know much about the Souls-like genre. It's definitely one of those. So thank you guys very much for watching. I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Lords of the Fallen, so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching again, and I'll see you next time.